Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual PrEP public meeting. My name is Ali Munir, and I will serve as the designated federal official, or the DFO, for the Science Advisory Committee on the Chemicals, or SACC, for the peer review of the draft hazard and exposure assessments for TBBPA, 1,2-dichloropropane, 1,12-trichloroethane, trans-1,2-dichloroethylene, and ethylene dibromide. I would like to welcome everyone to today's preparatory public meeting. As the DFO for this meeting, I serve as a liaison between the agency and the peer reviewers. Also in my role as a DFO, a critical responsibility is to work with the appropriate agency officials to ensure that all appropriate ethics regulations are satisfied. In that capacity, peer reviewers are briefed on the provisions of the federal conflict of interest laws, and each peer reviewer has filed a government confidential financial disclosure report, which has been reviewed to ensure all ethics requirements are met. This is a preparatory meeting focused on the scope and clarity of the charge questions. The meeting is for peer reviewers and for the public's benefit. We have public commenters who register to make brief comments related to the clarity and scope of the charge questions. The agency appreciates the peer reviewers' time and diligent work in preparing for this meeting and the public for attending and sending comments. The agenda and EPA presentation for this meeting is posted on the EPA SACC peer review website, and the meeting support documents are located in the docket at regulations.gov under docket number EPA-HQ-OPPT-2026-4226. Please be advised that agenda items are approximate. When the discussion for one topic is completed, discussions for the next topic will begin. I also wish to thank my EPA colleagues for all of their efforts in preparing for this meeting. Thank you to the SACC committee members and to the ad hoc peer reviewers for the preparation of the meeting. And thanks to Andina and Meeting Contact Incorporated for their assistance with the Zoom meeting and with the YouTube webcasting. Joining me in this session are the EPA Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics team for the draft hazard and exposure assessments for TBBPA, 1,2-DCP, 1,12-TCA, trans-DCE, and EDB. Today's preparatory meeting is not a formal FACA meeting, FACA standing for Federal Advisory Committee Act, but it's scheduled for you to discuss the charge and for the public to provide input on the charge questions. The public has been asked to provide comments on the charge only. You should listen to their input and feel free to ask them any questions to clarify the remarks. Again, the focus of this meeting is the scope and clarity of the charge. Likewise, there will be one EPA presentation, and you are invited to ask questions of the speaker to obtain any clarifications. Once the public has made their comments, I will lead through the charge questions. However, I won't be reading the charge question word for word, and I will ask the committee for any comments or suggestions on each question. You should individually feel free to provide any feedback, including feedback that may incorporate suggestions from public commenters. This is the committee's opportunity to ensure that the charge you are given is clear, provides answerable questions, and will help inform EPA's future actions. EPA welcomes your suggestions. After today's meeting, EPA will collate all the comments, incorporate feedback as appropriate, and send a revised final charge to the committee. If revised, the final charge will also be posted in the docket and onto our webpage, which is the EPA SACC peer review webpage. I'll now go over the meeting operations. We will ensure adequate time for the agency presentations, public comments, and peer reviewers to discuss their questions with agency presenters and public commenters. This meeting is being webcast over the internet via YouTube and by teleconference for audio. Speakers are asked to state their names and affiliations. This meeting is being recorded. There is a public docket for this meeting. Copies of all meeting materials and public comments will be available at regulations.gov under the docket number listed under the Federal Register notices and as stated earlier. We posted a draft agenda for the meeting and the EPA presentation at regulations.gov under the same docket number. In addition, links to the meeting information and supporting documents for this meeting are also available on the SACC website. Keep in mind, this meeting is only for points of clarification regarding the charge, not for the review of the public discussion of technical information for responses to the charge questions. For members of the public who previously requested time to make a public comment, your remarks are limited to 5 minutes. And for those of you who are listening on in and joining us via phone, at an appropriate point noted on the agenda, I will call for the public comments and our contractor will open the phone line for the registered speakers. Again, I wish to thank the committee for your participation in today's meeting. I will now turn it over to our esteemed chair, Dr. Robin Ann Gentry. The SACC chair, Dr. Gentry, will lead us in a few minutes in introductions of the SACC members and the peer reviewers.
Thank you, Ms. Munir. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this meeting. And before we begin introductions, I'd like to thank all the committee members and the ad hoc reviewers for their time and work that will be coming up in the next few weeks. My name is Robin Ann Gentry. I'm a PhD and board certified toxicologist. I've been working in the area of human health risk assessment for over 35 years now. And before I move on to the rest of the members, I'd like to first introduce my co-lead, Ms. Allison Jenkins.
You may be experiencing computer issues as she reached out to me a few minutes ago.
Well, I'll move on. Let's see. First, we have Dr. Apte.
Hi, everybody. My name is Udayan Apte. I'm a professor in the Department of Pharmacology, Toxicology, and Therapeutics at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I'm a board-certified toxicologist, and my expertise is in human health risk assessment.
Thank you. Dr. Baker. We're missing Dr. Baker as well. I'll come back to them. Dr. Barranco.
Hello, my name is Wade Barranco. I'm the head of toxicology and voice.
Okay, Dr. Bronco, it's a little hard to hear you.
Some,
a little bit.
Maybe come back here.
okay. I'll finish the roster and we'll come back to a few people, make sure we can hear them. Let's see, Dr. Burgoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Lyle Burgoon. I'm a toxicologist, a risk assessor, a biostatistician, and an epidemiologist. I'm also the president and CEO of Raptor Pharmatox, a consulting company.
Okay, Dr. Chin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Celia Chen. I'm a research professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Dartmouth College. I'm an aquatic ecologist and work in the area of ecotoxicology.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Darson.
Top of the day to you, gentle people. I have a PhD in toxicology, board certified, 46 plus years of working in human health risk assessment, and currently work for the environmental NGO Toxicology Excellence for Risk Assessment. Previously worked at EPA, where I helped develop many of the risk assessment guidelines, and served as a brief stint at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine as a professor.
Thank you. Dr. Ike.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ike. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University. I'm in the Department of Environmental Health and Epidemiology. My work primarily focuses on health effects of chemical exposures.
Thank you. Dr. Fong?
Thank you, Dr. Gentry. Hi, my name's Art Fong, and I am the technical leader for Smarter Chemistry at Apple, and my area of focus is on green and sustainable chemistry. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garvey?
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Garvey. I'm a public health scientist and a board certified environmental risk assessor. Currently, I'm a principal scientist with EHS support.
Thank you. Dr. Lee?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee. So I'm an associate professor of environmental health at University of Nevada, Reno. I do computational modeling, and my focus is the environmental fate and transport modeling and human exposure modeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ottinger?
Hello, everyone. Let me turn this around so you can see me. I'm a emeritus professor and research professor at the University of Houston. My fields of expertise are neurobiology, endocrinology, ecotoxicology, and wildlife biology, with an emphasis on One Health and the effects of pollutants on humans and wildlife alike. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ryer Powder?
Yes, my name is Dr. Jill Ryer Powder. I'm a board certified toxicologist with environmental health decisions. My focus is on toxicology and human health risk assessment.
Thank you. Dr. Sommel?
Hi, yes, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Jennifer Sommel. I am an exposure scientist and risk assessor with Insight Exposure and Risk Sciences, as well as an affiliate professor with the University of Minnesota in their environmental health program. And my areas of expertise are exposure assessment, and particularly dermal exposure assessment, but also inhalation exposures. And I'm both a certified industrial hygienist and a certified safety professional.
Thank you. Dr. Mushin?
Hi, my name is Hyung-Moo Shin. I'm an associate professor at Baylor University in the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences. I'm an environmental health scientist with expertise in environmental epidemiology, exposure assessment, and environmental fate and transport modeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tansel?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beren Tansel. I'm a professor at Florida International University in Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I'm a board-certified environmental engineer and registered professional engineer. My expertise areas are fate and transport of contaminants and exposure studies.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson?
Hi, I'm Chad Thompson. A toxicologist and risk assessor at Tox Strategies. And prior to that, I worked at USCPA. And combined, I have over 25 years of experience in human health risk assessment.
Thank you. Mr. Wright?
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Wright. I'm the retired Director of Health, Safety, and Environment for the United Steelworkers Union, which, despite its short name, represents a majority of organized workers in the chemical and chemical process industries. I was trained in industrial engineering, industrial hygiene, and public health, and my expertise is in occupational exposure assessment.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Haber?
Hi, my name is Lynn Haber. I'm a board certified toxicologist and risk assessor. My focus is on human health risk assessment and particularly the hazard characterization and dose response assessment portions of the risk assessment. And I am currently a professor at the University of Cincinnati in the Department of Environmental and Public Health Sciences.
Thank you. Dr. Klonick?
Hi, I'm Jim Klonig. I'm a emeritus professor at Indiana University. That's the national champion football team. Uh, and my area of expertise is in toxicology and pathology, with particular interest in carcinogenesis and liver toxicology.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Niemeyer?
Yeah, I'm trouble with my video. Good afternoon, everybody. Todd Niemeyer. I'm the chief of the risk evaluation branch with the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH. I'm a certified industrial hygienist and have expertise in risk assessment, exposure assessment, and toxicology. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Orsamit?
Hi, I'm Tom Osmitz. I'm a toxicologist with Science Strategies, a consulting firm. My background is in toxicology. I'm board certified, and the specialty I'm working in most currently is the application of new approach methodologies and modeling to the assessment of human risk.
Okay, thank you. Now check back on Ms. Jenkins. Have you joined us?
I have. Thank you. I apologize. It's not that I'm ignoring you. I'm Allison Jenkins, and I'm glad to see everybody. I'm a human health regulatory toxicologist at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality in Austin, and I've been there just over 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Dr. Baker, have you joined, or is she? Okay, I guess we'll move forward. I want to thank everyone again and welcome, and I look forward to working with you all over the next few weeks. And I guess with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Munir.
Thank you, Dr. Dentry. At this time, I now turn to our agency speaker, Dr. Colin Beecham, who will give the presentation of TSCA 101.
All right, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Colin Beecham, Deputy Division Director for the Existing Chemicals Risk Assessment Division in the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. I'd like to start by thanking our existing SACC members. It's nice to see many of you again, as well as welcoming our newest SACC members. Your work is critically important for ensuring the success of our TSCA program. And because we have new members joining for their first SACC meeting, I'm happy to kick us off here with an overview of TSCA to help set the stage for everyone. Next slide, please. So TSCA is the nation's chemical safety law. It gives EPA the authority to evaluate the risks of chemicals across their life cycle and requires safeguards so people have safe air, water, and products. Reviewing the chemicals already on the market is essential because many were introduced long before modern standards. TSCA now ensures they undergo rigorous, up-to-date assessment. Since the passage of the 2016 Lautenberg Amendments, which revised TSCA, EPA has completed risk evaluations for 23 existing chemicals, and we're working to complete 10 more by February 12th to be exact. This is an important legal deadline for us, which you'll hear me mention a few times throughout this presentation. These reviews focus on real-world exposures for workers, consumers, and communities, including vulnerable groups like workers and children. Since 2017, feedback from the SACC and the public has informed how EPA addresses key aspects of existing chemical risk evaluations. Independent peer review is a critical quality check. Outside experts like yourselves scrutinize methods, data, and conclusions to strengthen scientific integrity, reduce bias, and build public confidence. Peer review helps us identify data gaps, refine assessments, and ensure decisions are transparent, science-based, and protective. Each SACC review informs future risk evaluations, and our program is continually learning and evolving through what has become an iterative process. The combination of strong TSCA authority and independent peer review ensures chemical safety decisions are timely, credible, and focused on protecting people and the environment. Next slide, please. So this figure shows the three-step process that was put in place in 2016 through the Lautenberg amendments. So starting on the left and working through the blue boxes, the TSCA risk evaluation process is composed of three phases. First, prioritization. Second, the risk evaluation. And this is where these chemicals that we're talking about this in the upcoming weeks are in the process. And finally, risk management. For the purposes of peer review, we're focused on the risk evaluation part of the process. So under TSCA, EPA's review of existing chemicals must end with a clear yes/no decision, either unreasonable risk or no unreasonable risk. There is no third category. So an uncertainty does not create a middle ground for us. EPA addresses uncertainties with conservative, health protective, and reasonable assumptions that still makes a definitive finding. The determinations are made for each condition of use. A chemical may present unreasonable risk for some uses and no unreasonable risk for others, but each use gets a clear outcome. If EPA finds unreasonable risk, the law requires prompt risk management, like limiting uses, improving workplace protections, or phasing out hazardous conditions. If EPA finds no unreasonable risk, EPA documents the basis and does not impose new restrictions, but we still continue to monitor the science for new information. Your review, along with public comments, helps ensure the decision is transparent, science-based, and protective. Next slide, please. TSCA sets a high bar. EPA must evaluate chemicals using best available science and all reasonably available information, weigh the full body of evidence, and focus only on health and environmental risk, not costs, when making risk determinations. As I mentioned before, the outcome is decisive, either unreasonable risk or no unreasonable risk. If EPA finds unreasonable risk, the agency must regulate to reduce or eliminate it. EPA must consider risks to potentially exposed or susceptible subpopulations, or pests, which can include children, pregnant people, workers, and communities with higher exposures. And this is to ensure protections are health protective for everyone. Next slide, please. In the previous, next slide, please. In the previous slide, there were some very specific terms that I'd like to take a moment to explain because they're incredibly important to our risk evaluations and based on the definitions found in the statute. So can we back up one slide, please? There you go. Best available science found in TSCA section 26H requires that EPA document the risk evaluation is consistent with the best available science and based on the weight of scientific evidence. In determining the best available science, EPA considers, as applicable, the extent to which the information, technical procedures, measures, methods, protocols, methodologies, or models employed to generate the information are reasonable for and consistent with the intended use of the information. The extent to which the information is relevant for the administrator's use in making a decision about a chemical substance or mixture. The degree of clarity and completeness with which the data, assumptions, methods, quality assurance, and analyses employed to generate the information are documented. The extent to which the variability and uncertainty in the information or in the procedures, measures, methods, protocols, methodologies, or models are evaluated and characterized. And the extent of independent verification or peer review of the information or of the procedures, measures, methods, protocols, methodologies, or models. Next slide, please. Another important term is reasonably available information found in TSCA section 26K. This states that TSCA requires that EPA rely on reasonably available information, and EPA has defined this to mean information that EPA possesses or can reasonably generate, obtain, and synthesize for use in risk evaluations, considering the deadlines specified in TSCA section 6B4G for completing such evaluations. Information that meets the terms of the preceding sentence is reasonably available information, but it doesn't matter whether or not that information is confidential business information that's protected from public disclosure under TSCA Section 14. Next slide, please. Weight of scientific evidence found in TSCA Section 26I is another important term. To meet the law's requirements to base decisions in TSCA risk evaluations on weight of scientific evidence, EPA relies on established agency guidance documents, which provide consistency and formality to a process that looks to integrate multiple and often heterogenic lines of evidence. The weight of scientific evidence assessment is based on the strengths, limitations, and interpretation of the data available, the information across multiple lines of evidence, and how these different lines of evidence may or may not fit together when drawing conclusions. The weight of scientific evidence examines multiple lines of evidence from scientifically relevant published or publicly available studies in the peer-reviewed scientific journals, studies conducted in accordance with OECD or EPA guidelines, gray literature, and or other studies, scientific information or lines of evidence that are of sufficient quality, relevance, and reliability to evaluate across studies and endpoints to incorporate into an overall assessment. EPA has provided a summary weight of scientific evidence narrative narrative or characterization for each condition of use. This narrative is accompanied by a detailed analysis to transparently describe the conclusions, as well as explain the selection of the studies or effects used as the main lines of evidence and relevant basis for conclusions. Next slide, please. While not specifically called out in my earlier slides, another important TSCA term is condition of use. Conditions of use, or COUs, cover the entire life cycle of the chemical. They are defined as the circumstances as determined by the administrator under which a chemical substance is intended, known, or reasonably foreseen to be manufactured, processed, distributed in commerce, or used or disposed of. The COUs are first described in the scope document along with other required components. Uses regulated under other laws, such as pesticidal, drug, food and food additives, and cosmetic uses, are typically not within the scope of a TSCA risk evaluation. While we get many public comments on this, and often SACC recommendations as well, non-TSCA uses are outside the purview of our risk evaluations. EPA also has no tool or statutory authority to regulate these non-TSCA uses. Next slide, please. Unreasonable risk. This term is not defined in the statute or the regulations because of the unique nature of each risk evaluation and the need to make this determination on a case-by-case basis. EPA has historically weighed different factors when making this determination, including, but not limited to, the effects of the chemical substance on health and human exposure, such as to such substance under the conditions of use. The effects of the chemical substance on the environment and environmental exposure under the conditions of use. The population exposed, including any pests. The severity of hazard, the nature and irreversibility of that hazard, and of course the uncertainties. Next slide, please. As you saw in the previous slide, TSCA risk evaluations are time-bound. The 5 chemicals included in this peer review, along with those included in the previous peer review a month or so ago, have a due date of February 12th, 2027. That date is part of a consent decree imposed by the courts to ensure the timely completion of risk evaluations. This date is not optional for us, so you can see why it's important for the EPA to receive clear and actionable and timely feedback from the SACC. Next slide, please. As you have likely noticed, many of our risk evaluations include dozens of conditions of use and multiple exposure pathways. Starting on the left with different sources of the chemical, such as the articles and products in your homes to the industrial releases for manufacturing, those releases could end up in various environmental pathways of air, water, and land. The different environmental media to which those chemicals may go, such as air, ground and surface water, soil and sediment, and people, animals, and plants that may come into contact with chemicals contained in the air, water, and soil, or they can be brought into the body through dermal contact with the skin, inhaled, or ingested. Next slide, please. So EPA's draft risk characterization integrates the best available science to evaluate hazards and exposures for each condition of use, including risks to potentially exposed or susceptible subpopulations, and explains whether aggregate or sentinel exposures were considered and why. It accounts for the duration, intensity, frequency, and number of exposure events, bases conclusions on the weight of scientific evidence, and is released for at least a 60-day public comment period. Next slide, please. So in summary, the risk evaluation considers exposure and hazard to determine whether a chemical substance presents an unreasonable risk to human health or the environment under the conditions of use. It is the primary support document the agency uses if it is necessary to issue regulations to address unreasonable risks identified as part of the evaluation. Next slide, please. To ensure the use of high-quality science, our risk evaluations undergo several rounds of internal and external reviews. Here you see some examples of both internal peer-to-peer technical reviews and collaborations with other EPA offices, as well as examples of external review processes, just like this one. Next slide, please. So the feedback will help us decide several things. Feedback from the SACC panels and our stakeholders help to inform our risk evaluations in many ways, such as how and when to use certain methods or additional sources of data that may be incorporated in our evaluations. Next slide, please. TSCA sets a very high bar. For each condition of use, EPA must reach a clear determination of either unreasonable risk or no unreasonable risk. We have no in between. These risk evaluations are the foundation for the protections for people across the country. Our risk evaluations are also used to determine the future of businesses, policies and procedures that will need to be changed, protections that will need to be put in place, and reporting that will need to be done, just to name a few things. We use robust, high-quality science from many sources, including industry, academia, and NGOs, and decisions rest on the weight of scientific evidence and the best reasonably available information. Reviews consider real-world exposures across the chemical's life cycle and pay special attention to potentially exposed or susceptible subpopulations, including workers and children and communities with higher exposures. Independent peer review, like this one, and public comment are critical quality checks that improve the methods, surface new data, and build transparency and public confidence in the EPA's decisions. We need your input to make sure our evaluations are robust and realistic, so any future rules are protective and practicable. Your insights, specific and constructive recommendations, and hopefully consensus on important scientific issues help enhance the quality and credibility of the final risk evaluation. Next slide, please. So thank you. Thank you to the SACC and our stakeholders. Thank you again to our returning and the new SACC members for volunteering to serve, for all the time and effort that you have and will put into the reviews. We recognize we've submitted a lot of materials for your review. On behalf of the entire team, thank you, and we look forward to the upcoming meeting. With that, I'll turn the presentation back over to our DFO. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beecham. We will now move to the next portion of the agenda, which is the overview of the technical presentation for OPPT, and I believe Dr. Beecham will once again be providing the presentation.
And I'm sorry, excuse me for interrupting. I think there's a hand up, Dr. Durson.
Yes, top of the day to you again. I had two questions, and you've probably heard these before, maybe not. So in the idea of non-TSCA uses, EPA is now developing occupational exposure limits. which seems, at least to me, a little odd, since we have the national, NIOSH and OSHA available. So when EPA develops these OELs or OESs, how do they integrate or coordinate with our other federal agencies, please?
So yeah, good question. So thank you. We have special work groups that we work where we reach out to other agencies, part of that the external peer review process that we were talking about. So the non-TSCA uses are statutorily defined. So that's what we were speaking to. NIOSH and occupational uses are not excluded from TSCA.
Okay, so there, when NIOSH develops a number, a PEL or something, and EPA has a different one, those are resolved somehow?
So we reach out with we do stakeholder engagement with other agencies as well. So yes, so I don't know that necessarily always resolved, but those are part of our process, is reaching out to other agencies that have statutory or not statutory, but regulatory numbers. So
okay, and then thank you very much. A second question. You talked about weight of evidence, and that's a great idea. We've been using that for a long time. Recently, there was an executive order, a Golden Science executive order.
Yes.
I'm not sure the details. Have you integrated any particular changes to weight of evidence with this executive order? Are they consistent or harmonized, or are you guys still working through that?
So it's inclusive. I would argue that it's inclusive, so that they're not exclusive. The gold standard science is definitely something that we strive to meet. It is part of the review process that we have here for meeting the weight of evidence and the data quality evaluation components.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
Yeah, let me add one thing to the answer about the intersection between, excuse me, between EPA and TSCA and other regulatory agencies, specifically OSHA. There's a difference in how they essentially define unacceptable risk. OSHA doesn't begin to consider a chemical until they can demonstrate a risk of 1 in 1,000, whereas EPA typically uses 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 1,000,000. The OSHA number was actually derived from a Supreme Court case where, in a footnote, the case said that that the court was not going to try to define unacceptable risk, but that it lay somewhere between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 1,000,000. So OSHA uses that lower number in its regulatory program. We've had lots of cases where EPA has looked at a particular exposure and said this is really unacceptable, and has even sent a note to the workers involved, telling them that they're at great risk. And then an OSHA inspector comes in and says, no, it's not very risky here at all. And it's entirely a matter of the different definitions of unacceptable risk.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. That is correct. So we do have different statutory requirements between the two programs. That's correct. So thank you, and in some cases policy. Thank you.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, we will go ahead and continue to the next portion of our agenda. And it will be once again Dr. Beecham going over the overview of the peer review of the draft hazard and exposure assessments.
Thank you. So yes, this is Colin Beecham here with EPA. So we're gonna do a very brief introduction to some of the chemicals and set us up for the charge questions. So discussions on the charge questions. So all right, so next slide, please. So this is a timeline of where the chemicals started back in December 2019 with the designation of TBBPA, 1,2-dichloro-propane, 1,12-trichloroethane, trans-1,2-dichloroethylene, and ethylene dibromide. So which are the 5 chemicals that are the subject of the upcoming SACC and the charge questions that we're about to see later today. So like I said, in December of 2019, the chemicals were designated as high priority substances. With that, we began work on scope documents. The final scope documents were published in August of 2020. And recently, in June of 2026, portions of the risk evaluations for these 5 chemicals were opened, the public comment periods, released to the public. And then in a couple of weeks, in August of 2026, there's the SACC review of all or parts of the risk evaluations. And we need to finalize, as you heard in the previous presentation, we need to finalize those risk evaluations and have those published per court orders by February 12th, 2027, along with the other evaluations that went through SACC review about a month or so ago. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a very brief background of these 5 chemicals that are under review. You will hear more on the technical aspects of these chemicals with the technical presentations, with more in-depth technical presentations coming up in a couple of weeks to open the upcoming SACC meeting. So this one is TBBPA, is primarily used as a flame retardant. It is included either as an additive or a reactive flame retardant in many different applications. So workers, in this case, workers may be exposed while handling and directly contacting TBBPA, and TBBPA is released to air, land, or water and may contribute to general population or ecological exposures. Next slide, please. So this begins a series of 3 different chlorinated solvents. So the first one here is 1,2-dichloropropane. It's primarily used as a flame retardant and manufactured as a byproduct here in the United States. It can be processed as a reactant and incorporated into formulations, mixtures, and/or reaction products. Commercial and consumer uses include lab chemicals, cleaning and furnishing care products. And the primary exposure pathways are inhalation and/or dermal exposures. Next slide, please. Next up is 1,1,2-trichloroethane. So it is also primarily used as is primarily a chlorinated solvent with use manufactured in the United States, with uses as processing as a reactant and.
Dr. Beecham, it's kind of hard to hear you. Can you move closer to the mic? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you great now.
Oh, excellent. So sorry about that. All right. So 1,1,2, where did I stop here? 1,1,2 is manufactured here in the United States, also imported. Its primary use as processing as a reactant and other processing activities such as recycling. Industrial and commercial uses include inclusion in adhesives, sealants, and laboratory chemicals. And then primary exposure pathways are also inhalation and or dermal contact. So next slide, please. Trans-1,2-dichloroethylene, also a chlorinated solvent, is manufactured and imported in the United States and is primarily used as a reactant in processing. Commercial and consumer uses include cleaners, degreasers, lubricants, solvents, propellants, and of course, laboratory chemical use. And workers and consumers can be exposed through inhalation and dermal routes. So next slide, please. And finally, ethylene dibromide, or EDB. It's a volatile, water-soluble chemical. It is not manufactured in the United States. It is solely imported and has some repackaging here in the United States. EDB is primarily used as a fuel additive or fuel agent in processing, so in formulation mixtures and reaction products, industrial processes as reactant, and commercially used in laboratory chemicals. So primary concerns here: workers, occupational non-users, and some consumer may be exposed to EDB through inhalation and dermal contact. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of material that has been released to the public for review in this SACC meeting. And so the next couple of slides are to explain which chemicals and which documents are available for review. So some have all of the documents for the risk evaluation, like TBBPA. Here, you'll notice that each risk evaluation is made up of a series of parts, or TSDs, technical support documents. TBBPA's full risk evaluation is available for review, and it includes the physical and chemical fate and transport documents, environmental releases, occupational exposures, consumer exposure, the media, general population, and environmental exposure TSD, and then the hazard assessment, which includes both human health hazard, ecological hazard, and the systematic review documents as well. In contrast, 1,1,2-dichloropropane, the information that is available for review in this SACC is the hazard assessment, the human health hazard, and environmental hazard assessment. And you'll notice that the charge questions will reflect those portions as well. 1,1,2-trichloroethane TSDs that are available. It has the exposure assessment, which includes the physical chemistry fate and transport portions, along with the environmental releases, environmental exposure, occupational exposure, consumer exposure, and the general population exposure components. Along with that is the hazard assessment, human health hazard, and environmental hazard. So in this slide, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but in this slide, the solid outlines represent documents that are included in the SACC review. Dash boxes are lines that are not included in the peer review docket. However, those documents will be available for public comment upon the release of the risk evaluation portion of the, which includes the risk characterization. Next slide, please. Keeping in the theme with the previous slide, dash boxes are not available for in the peer review docket, but will be available in the TSCA public comment during the TSCA public comment period. The things that are included in this peer review docket are for trans-1,2-dichloroethylene is the hazard assessment, which includes the human health hazard and the environmental hazard. For ethylene dibromide, the two TSDs are available: the exposure assessment and the hazard assessment, which includes both human health and environmental hazard. Next slide, please. So this SACC review prioritizes areas not previously reviewed. And so that's why some documents are available and others are not. It deprioritizes routine content and methods that have already been reviewed by the SACC. Utilizes SACC's technical expertise to help resolve the most scientifically challenging questions and provide input on novel approaches. So in this SACC, key areas where we're seeking feedback include the study and points of departure selection for acute, intermediate, and chronic and cancer effects. This is for all the chemistries. The physiological-based pharmacokinetic, or PBPK, model application and use in 1,1,2-trichloroethane and ethylene dibromide, and probabilistic occupational dermal modeling approach and parameterization, which you see in 1,1,2-trichloroethane. So SACC input on these approaches will inform not just these chemicals, but also future TSCA risk evaluations, much like what we've done in previous SACC panels. So one thing to note before we move on to the charge question is that some of these charge questions have been revised in accordance with public comments that we have received. So thank you. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to turn this back over to our DFO to get us into the charge questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beecham. At this time, we are going to call on our oral public commenters to ask if there are any questions regarding the clarity and scope of the draft charge questions. You have up to 5 minutes to make your comment. There will be a timer posted on the screen for 5 minutes. Please turn on your video when making your comment. I will go ahead and now turn it over to the first person to make their oral comment. Please turn on your video and please state your name and the affiliation you are with.
Hi, good afternoon. Is there a specific order that we're supposed to go in? I don't think that was communicated clearly or I missed it. Thank you.
Hi, Lindsay. You can just go ahead in the essence of time, be the first commenter.
All right, happy to.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Lindsay Holden, senior toxicologist with the Bergeson and Campbell, here on behalf of the TDCE Consortium Risk Evaluation Advocacy Group. I appreciate the opportunity to present oral comments here before the EPA and the SACC at this preparatory meeting. My colleague, Heather Blankenship, will discuss separately some of the overarching concerns that we wish to highlight related to the charge questions and procedural issues impacting the effectiveness of SACC peer review. I will be summarizing our key technical concerns on EPA's charge questions for SACC peer review of the technical support documents for the TDCE risk evaluation. To begin, I wish to highlight the deficiencies in the SHOP et al. 1985 study that EPA selected as the key study with the critical endpoint of humoral immune response for deriving human health hazard for the intermediate and chronic duration exposures extrapolated to all routes of exposure. There are multiple critical deficiencies in this study that we describe in depth in our written comments. First, there is a questionable biological relevance and adversity of the immune endpoint based on normal biological variation. Second, there are multiple issues with general study design. We have summarized several of our comments to include the use of deionized water for control animals versus a 1% emulsifier in water for exposed groups, outside of the test substance. The selected cohort of animals used to estimate water consumption, selection of that, and the route of sheep red blood cell administration for the immune challenge, which was intraperitoneal versus intravenous. There are other adequate quality repeat dose studies that should be considered for health hazard endpoints based on oral and inhalation routes of exposure. If the SHOP et al. 1985 study is maintained as the key study, then any reference dose or concentration for inhalation or dermal exposure routes would require route-to-route extrapolation, which introduces uncertainty. So given the overall uncertainties in the key study selected by EPA for determining chronic hazard in SHOP et al. 1985, the TDCE Risk Evaluation Advocacy Group requests that the SACC evaluate carefully which study is of sufficient quality to be the basis for the eventual calculation of an occupational exposure value in EPA's imminently forthcoming draft risk evaluation, since all you will be reviewing is the hazard assessment. We further suggest that the SACC address specifically the uncertainty factors assigned by EPA, including considerations of the key study, the critical endpoints, the route of exposure, and impacted populations such as workers, who are largely a healthy and more homogeneous population, consumers, or the general population. The SACC should keep in mind that occupational exposure limits at or near 200 ppm are already established and enforceable by other competent authorities, including OSHA, NIOSH, ACGIH, California's OSHA, and ECA. We have proposed an additional charge question for the TDCE hazard assessment to address specifically the topic of appropriate uncertainty factors. And we've submitted those to the public docket. We appreciate that EPA also included in its charge questions consideration of the WHO FAO guidance as a potential off-ramp for establishing points of departure if there are adequate data to determine that TDCE is of sufficiently low hazard, has an absence of genotoxicity and lack of toxic metabolites. We urge the SACC to include in its consideration other guidance or approaches that are available and relevant to apply in similar scenarios of low hazard, non-genotoxicity, and no or low toxic metabolite production for not only TDCE, but also for future substances undergoing existing chemical review. We have therefore also proposed revised language for charge question 13A3 to expand the consideration to cover this request. So thank you again for the opportunity to present these comments. That concludes my time.
Thank you, Ms. Holden. We are now going to go to our next oral commenter. Please remember to turn your video on and please state your name. Thank you. We cannot hear you. Please put yourself on, please unmute yourself.
Okay, there
Thank
we go.
you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Heather Blankenship, Senior Manager with B&C Consortium Management, and I'm the Consortium Manager for the TDCE Consortium. I'm commenting today on behalf of the TDCE Consortium's Risk Evaluation Advocacy Group. As my colleague Lindsay Holden stated, the group has submitted written comments to EPA's charge questions, and those are in the public docket, specifically related to the TDCE risk evaluation. My comments are focused on 3 charge questions that we suggest adding to the SACC's peer review. First, EPA is requesting peer review of the draft, only requesting peer review of the draft technical support documents for environmental and human health hazards, rather than the full risk evaluation, wherein EPA will have also considered exposure data and made risk determinations for TDCE. This approach effectively excludes peer review on significant components of the risk evaluation and the overall integration of the evidence, the exposure assessment, and the synthesis of hazards and exposures into risk characterization. Members of the SACC and other public stakeholders have previously raised concerns that reviewing standalone hazard assessments makes it challenging for the SACC to evaluate fully how those hazards translate into final risk characterizations. Restricting the SACC's review to component parts rather than the whole forthcoming TDCE risk evaluation calls into question whether a partial peer review process will satisfy EPA's obligations for the scientific rigor that is mandated under the Toxic Substances Control Act. We've therefore suggested verbiage for an additional charge question that we included in our comments that requests that the SACC comment on the scientific merit of the peer review of select technical support documents without the full context of the draft risk evaluation. Second, there is no charge question requesting that the SACC review EPA's reanalysis of the dermal absorption data that were collected and submitted in 2024 by the TDCE Consortium under a TSCA Section 4 test order. TDCE is a highly volatile substance. Its volatility complicates the measurement of dermal absorption and ultimately EPA's assessment of the risk from dermal exposures. The SACC should provide peer review of EPA's assessment of the EPA's draft dermal absorption calculations for trans-1,2-dichloroethylene, wherein EPA used data from a GLP study to perform its own data analysis. We've suggested verbiage for an additional charge question that requests that the SACC comment on 1, the validity of EPA's derived potentially absorbable dose and permeability coefficient, 2, the acceptability of carrier solvents for finite and infinite dose experiments, and 3, the dataset selections for application to occupational, consumer, and general population exposure scenarios. Finally, there is no charge question requesting that the SACC review any of the environmental hazard assessment work performed by EPA. This is an inappropriate gap, as there are multiple analogs that EPA has selected for read-across data to fill data gaps on the potential environmental hazards of TDCE. The SACC should perform peer review of the environmental assessment to ensure EPA is fulfilling its TSCA statutory mandate to conduct risk evaluations based on the best available science and weight of the scientific evidence. We've suggested verbiage for an additional charge question requesting that the SACC review and comment on EPA's environmental hazard assessment and analog selection for TDCE. We've highlighted the need specifically to review the basis for 1, EPA's assumption that the highly volatile substance TDCE partitions to water. 2, why TDCE were excluded from species sensitivity distribution. TDCE data were excluded from species sensitivity distribution modeling, and 3, why other more relevant analogs, including 1,2-dichloropropane, which is under concurrent review by the SACC, were not considered. We thank you for this opportunity to express our views, and that's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Blankenship. The next person to make an oral comment is Dr. Marissa Kreider from Stantec. I will now turn it over to Dr. Kreider.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marissa Kreider, and I'm a board-certified toxicologist with the Health Sciences Advisory Team at Stantec. We have been supporting the Vinyl Institute on issues related to the ongoing risk evaluation of 1,12-trichloroethane. My comments today have been prepared on behalf of the Vinyl Institute and its 1,12-trichloroethane TSCA consortium. Based on the charge questions issued to the SACC, it is clear that the EPA has a solid understanding of the limitations associated with the hazard assessment of 1,12-trichloroethane. The purpose of my comments today will be to highlight the questions VI would advocate for inclusion in the charge questions, as well as areas for consideration by the SACC related to such questions. The VI has submitted formal written comments with additional context to the docket, but at this time I seek to highlight the most important points of this assessment. First, we ask that the SACC consider the potential limitations of extrapolating dose response information from oral gavage studies to predict effects in humans, where exposures are typically under more extended durations, such as inhalation in occupational settings or consumption of drinking water. Both the acute and oral carcinogenicity benchmarks are extrapolated from oral gavage studies. Gavage exposure may result in unique pharmacokinetic conditions and/or peak internal doses that are not representative of other exposure conditions. In fact, there is some evidence in the available data set for 1,12-trichloroethane indicating effects observed following gavage exposure are not observed with other routes of administration. In particular, when addressing question 9, we request that in reviewing a reliance on the TBBPA model for route-to-route extrapolation, that the SACC assess whether the model sufficiently accounted for potential differences in pharmacokinetic characteristics such as Cmax, metabolic pathway utilization, and/or detoxification. Secondly, the SACC should consider the quality and weight of evidence on genotoxicity of 1,12-trichloroethane when considering the Clancer classification and the approaches to dose response for 1,12-trichloroethane with question 9. The agency did not independently assess the quality or reliability of many of the available genotoxicity studies, and the only available in vivo genotoxicity study that was assessed for quality was negative. Consideration of the weight of evidence from this data, especially in light of the fact that the agency's conclusions on carcinogenicity of 1,12-trichloroethane differ from those of other regulatory agencies, including IARC, is critical. Thirdly, the SACC should review EPA's approach to systematic review, particularly given the absence of clear inclusion or exclusion criteria for studies identified on analogs such as 1,11-trichloroethane, and the variation in the inclusion and exclusion criteria applied over the course of their assessment. Lastly, we ask that the SACC assess the impacts of the dose response assessment and associated limitations on potential occupational exposure values, or OEVs, for 1,12-trichloroethane, including the proposed uncertainty factors recommended by the agency throughout the dose response assessment. Using EPA's previously established methods, it is anticipated that the OEV for 1,1,2-trichloroethane will be several orders of magnitude lower than currently enforceable occupational exposure limits, both in the US and globally. Given the uncertainties in the assessment highlighted by the EPA's questions to the SACC, VI believes these aspects require critical review. With that, I thank the EPA and the SACC for their time and commitment to a high-quality review of the ongoing risk evaluations. I hope that these comments are considered to enhance the peer review process and ultimately improve the quality of the final risk evaluation for 1,1,2-trichloroethane.
Thank you for your comment, Dr. Kreider. The next person to make an oral comment is Dr. Steve Risotto, consultant to the American Chemistry Council's chlorine panel. I will now turn it over to Dr. Steve Risotto.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gentry, Ms. Jenkins, and members of the committee. My name is Steve Risotto, and I'm not a PhD, just to correct Ali. I'm here to discuss the draft charge questions for 1,1,2-trichloroethane, or TCA, and trans-1,2-dichloroethylene, or trans-DCE, on behalf of the American Chemistry Council's chlorine panel. The panel represents companies who produce TCA and trans-DCE primarily as byproducts and reactants. In addition to chemical-specific questions, EPA asked for your input on 4 general science issues, which the panel addresses in its written comments. However, EPA does not seek guidance on its approach to applying uncertainty factors for inter- and intraspecies variability and low-L to no-L and subchronic to chronic adjustments. These uncertainty factors define the margin of exposure the agency will use to determine unreasonable risk in the draft risk evaluations to be released shortly. As the committee may not have the opportunity to review these risk determinations, it is vitally important that you consider whether EPA is appropriately applying uncertainty factors to its calculations, including for human variability when addressing worker populations. Focusing on the draft assessment for TCA, questions 5 and 6 request comment on the relevance of olfactory lesions reported in inhalation studies with rats. Given questions about the relevance of these lesions to human exposure, the committee should consider whether other data from acute studies are more appropriate and whether sufficient data exists to develop a chronic non-cancer value. Question 8 requests comment on the immunotoxicity reported in the subchronic drinking water study used to derive the chronic oral point of departure. EPA proposes to apply an uncertainty factor of 10 to extrapolate to chronic exposure. Yet the no effect and lowest effect levels in the 90-day study are quite similar to those reported from a 14-day study. The committee should consider whether an adjustment is necessary for estimating the chronic oral value. Questions 9 and 10 seek input on the agency's evaluation of the NCI bioassay and the use of a PBPK model to extrapolate to inhalation exposure. EPA asks the committee for feedback on the use of a linear low-dose extrapolation for estimating dose response, but not about the potential impact of bolus delivery of the substance administered in corn oil in the study. The potential for these 2 factors to confound the interpretation of study results warrants the committee's scrutiny. Question 11 asks about the proposal to use a probabilistic approach to estimating dermal exposure in occupational settings. EPA points to its exposures factors handbook in support of assuming submersion of both hands as the upper bound for the skin surface area in its model. The agency does not question how the assumption of full submersion aligns with the controlled uses and physical properties of TCA, which causes whiteness of the skin and a burning sensation. The committee should consider this alignment. Regarding trans-DCE, question 12 asks for feedback on the proposal to use ocular irritation as the basis for evaluating acute effects for inhalation exposure. This approach contrasts with that taken to develop the acute exposure guidance levels, or AGLEs, for the substance. Contrary to EPA's characterization, the AGLE committee did not rely solely on case reports from the 1930s in developing its value. The committee should consider whether there is sufficient evidence to support EPA's decision to disregard the AGLE 2 value, which, to paraphrase the AGLE documentation, represents the level above which the general population could experience irreversible or long-lasting health effects, including susceptible individuals. Finally, question 13 asks for comment on aspects of the proposed derivation of chronic non-cancer effects, which relies on a decrease in antibody-forming cells in the spleen reported in mice. The approach taken for trans-DCE contrasts with that taken for TCA, which finds changes in multiple immune endpoints and relies on measurement of antibody response from all immune tissues rather than the response from only the spleen. Relying on serum antibody response, as in the TCA assessment, aligns better with how antibodies are measured in humans. Lacking other evidence, we asked the committee whether the inhalation study at DuPont Haskell Labs is a better study for assessing potential immune effects for trans-DCE. Thank you for the opportunity to review the chlorine panel's suggested edits to the draft charge questions.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Risotto. Next, we are moving to the discussion and clarity of the draft charge questions portion of the agenda with the committee. So if you could please project slides 11 and 12 onto the screen. All right, we will first start with TBBPA. Next slide, please. So everyone, please take a moment to read this charge question to yourself, and then I will call on Dr. Devin Allwell to read the charge question in bold. So please take a few moments to read that to yourself. Okay, Dr. Allwell, will you please read the bold?
Yes, thank you. Devin Allwell, EPA, reading charge question 1. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties in the selected intermediate and chronic HEDs proposed for TBBPA.
Thank you, Dr. Allwell. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, I see a hand raised. Dr. Haber?
Yes, so this relates to the question I asked in the administrative meeting earlier. So the charge question asks only about the HEDs. So is consideration of uncertainty factors, and this would apply to any situation like this, is consideration of uncertainty factors within the scope for the committee?
Devin Allwell, US EPA, thank you for your question. Yes, uncertainty factors would be within the scope of this question and evaluating the hazard for charge question 1.
Thank you.
Dr. Ryer Powder?
So I would ask, does this include uncertainties within the specific studies that were used to come up with the NOEL or the LOELs?
Devin Allwell, EPA, yes, thank you for your question. It would include the uncertainties as part of the narrative that is built within the human hazard assessment that leads to our preliminary POD selection, which would ultimately also include the weight of evidence discussion as well.
So yes, so the uncertainties within the study.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Dorson?
Yes, again, thank you for your presentation. Just a question, I may have missed it, but do any of the public comments address this question or enhance it or detract from it?
I think I may have to defer to the team on that question to make sure I answer you accurately. I'm not sure at this time.
Would you like to take a moment to confer with your team? And then,
Yes, please.
all right, one moment, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Devin Allwell, USCPA. To my knowledge, the answer is no to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorson. Are there any remaining questions before we move on to the next charge question? All right, I don't see any hands. Let's go to the next charge question. Charge question 2. We ask that everyone to take a moment to read this introduction to the charge question on your own. All right, next slide. Dr. Allwell will now read aloud charge question number 2.
Thank you, Devin Allwell, USCPA, reading charge question 2A. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties in EPA's preliminary conclusion that chronic TBBPA-induced uterine tumors is related to a SALT-1E1 inhibition MOA with a nonlinear biological threshold of effects.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, I don't see any hands. Oh, well, I see a hand raised now. Dr. Dorson?
This is going to be a reoccurring question, I believe. So again, the question is, we had public comments, and I may have missed, some of the discussion of the public comments. I no doubt I have. But are we having public comments that affect this particular charge question? And perhaps we can make that, it's going to be a reoccurring question. So perhaps you could add or subtract, as you go along. Thank you, Devin.
Thank you for your question, Devin Allwell, EPA. The answer is no, and I will also state for TBBPA, for human hazard specifically, we have not received public comments to that nature currently.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other remaining questions for 2A before we move along? All right, Dr. Allwell, will you please read 2B?
Yes, thank you. Devin Allwell, EPA, reading charge question 2B. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of EPA's preliminary cancer classification for TBBPA.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Burgoon?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to address something. DOW did provide comments on question 1 and question 2B. And so I don't know if that's helpful for you, Mike, or not, but I just noticed that when I was going through their comments.
Thank you for your comment. Yes, I interpreted the previous question as comments that significantly change these charge questions, but I will make sure to review that. Thank you.
With the intention of incorporating the appropriate comments, of course. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Are there any other remaining questions before we move on to the next chemical? in the next charge question. Thank you, Dr. Allwell. Next slide, please. So we are now moving to 1-2 DCP. Next slide, please. Please take a moment to read the introduction of the charge question on your own. And then I will call on Ms. Nerio Orentas to read the charge question in the bold font on the next slide. Next slide, please. Ms. Orentas will now read charge question 3A. That's in bold font now.
This is Nerio Orentas, EPA. Please comment on the strength and uncertainties of the Kirk et al. 1995 study and the selected endpoints for acute oral, inhalation, and dermal PODs for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Thank you, Ms. Orentas. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Dorson?
Thank you for being polite here. And the same question as before. So we had public comments, including the DOW. Thank you, Dr. Burgon. And do the comments from your perspective change things here? How did you evaluate those public comments on this question, please?
There were no specific public comments on 1,2-dichloropropane, if that is your question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll just move on to the next question on this slide, 3AI. Ms. Orentas, if you could please read the bold font.
Please comment on the strength and uncertainties of using the POD for hematological effects from the Bruckner et al. 1989 study for intermediate and chronic oral risk assessment.
Thank you, Ms. Orentas. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 3AI? All right, it looks like there's no questions. Next slide, please. All right, if you could just please, everyone, take a moment to read the introduction on the charge question on your own. Ms. Orentas will now read charge question 3B.
Nerio Orentas, EPA. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of the Dow Chemical 1988 study and the selected endpoints for intermediate and chronic inhalation PODs for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 3B? Dr. Dorson?
Yeah, this is getting to be, anyhow, let's just go right into it. Mr. Risotto talked about an inhalation study, and I don't know if it was with this particular chemical or not. And if it was with this chemical, how did you interpret his commentary, please, or his suggested for a revision?
I don't believe it was regarding this particular chemical, but we'll consider all comments as they apply to each chemical. So we won't be excluding any comment.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 3B? All right, moving along to 3C, Ms. Arentis will now read charge question 3B aloud.
Mary Arentis, EPA, please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of applying short-term duration hazard values to estimate hazard across other exposure durations. Please suggest other studies that EPA should consider for acute, intermediate, and chronic hazard values.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. We'll move on to the next charge question 4. So, Ms. Arentis, would you please read aloud charge question 4? This introduction. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The introduction?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Mary Arentis, EPA, Section 2.4 of the Draft Human Health and Environmental Hazard Assessment for 1,2-dichloropropane provides EPA's preliminary evaluation of the available scientific literature on 1,2-dichloropropane, including consideration of epidemiology, laboratory animal bioassays, and mechanistic information.
Next slide, please. All right, so everybody please take a moment to read I to yourself, and then I will ask Ms. Arentis to read number 1 momentarily. Ms. Arentis will now read charge question 4 I1 aloud.
Mary Arentis, EPA, I'll be reading 4AI. Please comment on EPA's preliminary conclusion regarding the slight association, including the strengths and uncertainties of this preliminary conclusion. 4AII, please also comment on EPA's preliminary conclusion that the Japanese print shop worker studies do not support quantitative dose response assessment for deriving a POD in the TSCA risk evaluation for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? I see that Dr. Burgoon. Oh, Dr. Burgoon?
Yeah, this is probably a silly question because I'm sure you actually defined slight in the assessment, but I'm just curious, do you actually define slight in the assessment?
It is not a quantitative threshold for slight, but yes, there is a definition of slight versus robust evidence.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Dr. Dorson?
Yeah, my question was just going to one of the epidemiologists on our SACC, if this is a typical text or verbiage or description of causal relationships in epidemiology studies. If it is, that's fine. I will be skilled and taught. That's fine.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dorson.
Well, is any epidemiologist on the SACC going to respond to that? I guess it was.
Michael, can you repeat your question? This is Dr. Eicher. I'm an epidemiologist. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what your question is.
Well, the question goes to Dr. Burgoon's idea of slight evidence of causal relationship. Is that something that epidemiologists, they use this term all the time?
Do you mean the slight evidence? Is that the language that you're concerned about?
Yeah, the question regards, are we comfortable with EPA's characterizing the evidence as slight for causal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that the wording of the question is fine. That I mean, I think slight association is a term that we use in epidemiology, if that's answers your question.
Thank you very much, it does.
Dr. Gentry?
A little bit to that, because as part of our charge to reviewing these types of questions, certainly if we see something that is inconsistent with that type of association, my understanding is we're free to include that in our responses.
Thank you, Dr. Gentry. Dr. Shin?
Yes, I'm also environmental epidemiologist. I think that EPA meant to say weak association instead of slight association. Isn't it?
Does the program office have a response to this? You could take a moment and confer amongst yourselves before Ms. Arentis provides a response.
I don't usually see that word, slight association. Maybe the modest association with statistical significance at the borderline. So I'm not sure whether it is meant to be like low effect size or like the p-values close to the significance level, like a 0.05. So I guess this one needs to be clear.
Yes, hi, this is Kathy Denisio, Senior Science Advisor at EPA. I think on this one, we appreciate the committee's questions, and there might be some confusion between the association and the causal relationship as shown in the study and EPA's terminology around how we identify confidence in the studies in terms of, our ability to, and the way in which we incorporate the studies into our risk evaluation. And I think those two things might be getting tangled up here. So we will take these comments into consideration and go back and look at the real precise wording of the charge question, both in the question that's not in bold, that last sentence, the slight evidence of a causal relationship, but also the bold, regarding the slight association, and see if we can tweak the wording to be clear. But I think just the important piece for the SACC is keeping in mind that those two pieces might be different, right? There's the study, and then there's how we evaluate our confidence and how we can use the study in our risk evaluation. And both are within the scope of the charge question. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Denosio. Are there any remaining questions for this charge question before we move on to the next one? Okay, Dr. Gentry?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify again, because we're talking about quality and how EPA assessed quality, but am I correct that for this particular compound, we're not going to see the systematic review documents?
This is Mary Arentis, EPA. There is a systematic review file that does contain the studies that were considered and their evaluation.
So
for human health and ecological hazard, just those
So-
associated with this document hazard.
So
I'm
we
sorry.
do have the document that shows each of the metrics that were met to do the quality. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Rentis. And I'll help out in making sure that the SACC does have that document as they review and answer and respond to this charge. So if there's no more questions on this charge question, I'll ask Ms. Arentis to please read aloud for AII and to everyone.
Mary Arentis, EPA. Next slide, please.
Oh, okay. You already did II? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. So please read 4B to yourself. All right. All right. So Ms. Arentis will now read charge question 4B I aloud.
Mary Arentis, EPA. Please comment on EPA's evaluation of the laboratory animal data in section 2.4.2. Please include in your comments a consideration of the data quality ratings derived from the US EPA 2026C for the laboratory animal cancer bioassay for 1,2-dichloropropane. Matsumoto et al. 2013, Umeda et al. 2010, and NTP 1986.
Thank you, Ms. Arentis. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, not seeing any hands. We'll go to the next charge question. Please take a moment, a few seconds just to read the II, 4BII to yourself, and then I'll ask Ms. Arentis to read the bold. All right, Ms. Arentis will now read aloud charge question 4BII.
Neria Arentis, EPA. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of EPA's preliminary cancer classification for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, I don't see any hands raised. We'll go on to the next charge question. All right, please take a few moments to read this intro chapeau text to yourself. All right, Ms. Arentis will now read charge question III-1 aloud.
Neria Arentis, EPA. Please comment on EPA's proposed approach for deriving oral, inhalation, and dermal slope factors for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Thank you, Ms. Arentis. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question. Ms. Arentis, please read aloud charge question number 2.
Neria Arentis, EPA. Pending your comments on 4BIII, please provide alternative approaches for evaluation of cancer risk for 1,2-dichloropropane.
Thank you, Ms. Arentis. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll just move on to the next charge question. We are now moving on to 1,1,2-trichloroethane. Next slide, please. And for this, we will have Dr. Andrew Middleton read the charge questions for this chemical. Please take a moment to read this. As you can see, this charge question has been modified. What you see in red is the red line edit, and there has been some additional sub-questions added to charge question 5, questions 5B and 5C. So first of all, please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. All right, Dr. Middleton will now read charge question 5A.
Andrew Middleton, EPA, reading question 5A. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of using necrosis in the olfactory tissue from Will Research for acute inhalation risk assessment. Please include in your comments considerations for applying this rodent endpoint and POD to humans, given differences in respiratory architecture between rats and humans.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Thompson?
Yes, so this is pertinent to Dr. Dowerson's questions. I think we did have a comment here from one of the public commenters about the potential for also considering other acute studies or endpoints as part of this charge question. Is that open for inclusion here, or are we just focusing essentially on the necrosis issue and then whatever was added between the original version and this one? I guess it's the neural.
Yeah, Andrew Middleton, EPA. I would say question 5B, I think gets to that point where we ask for additional consideration of additional ports of departure that was added in response to the public comments.
Thank you.
Are there any further clarifying questions or questions about the scope for 5A? All right, we will now move on to 5B. Dr. Middleton, please read aloud charge question 5B.
Andrew Middleton, EPA. Based on your responses to 5A, please suggest alternative approaches for acute inhalation risk assessment for 1,1,2-trichloroethane. Please include in your comments consideration of alternative points of departure.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Chen?
Yeah, thank you. I've had this question throughout all of our questions, and because I'm an ecologist, I have been wondering about, I assume these all pertain to humans. It did say that earlier in one of the related questions, but is there ever environmental hazard being considered in this question or the others in terms of other organisms? I'm not sure if that's too general, and I apologize if it is, but I've been wondering this, given that I don't study human exposures, but I have, been wondering about the ecological exposures.
Andrew Middleton, EPA. I believe this question is related specifically to human health, but I can consult with the team as well to make sure that that's clear.
Hi, this is Karen Eisenreich, EPA. I can help on this particular question. These questions do pertain to human health specifically. We did not have any questions for 112 TCA on the environmental assessment.
Okay, just wondering because in the earlier components for the draft risk assessment, there's evaluation, there's discussion of hazards assessment for environmental hazards. So I guess, and I haven't seen any questions to that. So does that just mean that you've already covered that before and it's not relevant to this evaluation, that these things don't pertain to environmental or ecological endpoints?
We do have an environmental hazard assessment that is part of the full hazard assessment, so we do cover it. We just did the hazard assessment for this particular chemical, and some of the others did not elicit necessary feedback from the SACC in the form of charge questions, because there are fairly standard approaches and data sets that we used in the assessment. so they did not rise to the level of needing scientific feedback from the SACC. Our human health assessments are, in the case of this chemical and some of the others, are where we have more scientific based questions that need to be addressed by the SACC.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you, Dr. Eisenreich. Dr. Shin, you're next for your question.
Yes, these two 5B and 5C questions are not available in the SharePoint. So do you think that these questions will be available to the team within like 24 hours?
Yeah. So I can just quickly answer that question. So yes, this updated slide set with the red line is now on the docket and it's now been posted. And I will go ahead and make sure that the committee does have this latest version after the meeting. I posted it onto our private SharePoint site.
Okay.
All right, the next person is Dr. Thompson.
Yes. Does EPA know whether the more detailed submitted comments have any acute studies that were not presently in the TSCA evaluation that we're looking at?
I can answer this one. Hi, this is Karen Eisenreich, EPA. We did not see any additional, to the best of my knowledge, we did not see any additional studies presented in the comments received on the charge. Now, this is just to keep in mind that we don't have the public comments on the documents yet. So these public comments that we're talking about are narrow and are on the scope and clarity of the charge, versus the public comments we're going to receive shortly, but in time for the meeting, the August 3rd meeting, which will be more on the content and the analysis. And those responses to those public comments will be taken into consideration along with the SACC recommendations between draft and final. So there's a slight difference here if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Tansel?
Yeah, I wanted to get some clarification here. The focus is only the inhalation. Listening to Dr. Chan's comment, like food chain would not be a consideration here. Is that correct?
Hi, this is Karen Eisenreich, EPA. This again pertains to human health. So if you're referring to food chain in the aspect of an environmental assessment, this does not incorporate that aspect.
Are there any further clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? If not, we'll move on to the next sub-question. I'll ask Dr. Middleton to please read aloud the next charge sub-question.
Andrew Middleton, EPA. I'll add again that reading 5C, which was added as part of our response to public comments. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of using the Will Research and Nicholson studies for evaluating risk from 1,1,2-trichloroethane inhalation exposures lasting less than 24 hours.
Thank you, Dr. Middleton. Does the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question. Next slide, please. All right, take a moment to take a quick read of this charge question. All right, Dr. Middleton will now read what's in bold for the charge question on this slide.
Andrew Middleton, EPA, reading charge question 6. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of using lesions in the olfactory tissue from Will Research for intermediate and chronic inhalation risk assessment. Please include in your comments considerations for applying this rodent endpoint and POD to humans, given differences in respiratory architecture between rats and humans. In addition, please include in your comments a consideration of the use of a 90-day toxicity study to represent chronic exposure duration.
Thank you, Dr. Middleton. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Dorson?
Yes, again, top of the day to everybody. Yeah, we do have some public comments here. I'm actually not sure which group, maybe several, that spoke about the use of an uncertainty factor from going from subchronic to chronic, a typical thing that EPA does. I think the question there should somehow be integrated into this, what you have here. Since there seems to be similarities between acute and subchronic, which of course lends support to consideration of the tenfold factor going elsewhere to chronic. So if you modify that somehow, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that comment, and we are we'll take all of these comments into consideration as we look to revise these charge questions to better reflect public comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorson. Thank you, Dr. Middleton. Any remaining clarifying questions or questions about the scope before we move on to the next one? All right, next slide, please. All right, please, we ask everyone to take a moment to read the introduction of the charge on your own. And also, please, in the interest of time, because we have many more slides to go, please read what's in the bold to yourself before I open it up to the committee. All right, I'll ask, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of charge question 7? Dr. Bronco?
Yeah, the first two sentences of the question is referring to Will Research 2004, the oral neurotox study. And then when it comes to the question in bold, it's referring to the inhalation study, the 2001. Is that a typo for the second, or are you asking about both studies?
Yeah, Andrew Middleton, EPA. Let me consult with the team briefly, and we'll get back with an answer quickly.
All right, thank you. All right.
Andrew Middleton, EPA. I think we will check the reference on that and make sure that we're referring to the correct studies, and provide any revisions in redline.
All right, thank you, Dr. Middleton. Are there any other questions from the committee as it relates to the clarity and scope? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question. All right, please take a moment to read this introduction to the charge on your own. All right, next slide, please. Please take a moment to read the sub-question on your own. All right, I'll ask does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of question 8A? Dr. Dorson?
Yeah, I'll just emphasize there's a lot of angst about this particular set of studies. So if you could take the public comments and work them into the charge question, that would be great. Thank you.
Dr. Jenkins? Oh, Dr. Middleton, did you have a reply?
No, I was just going to say thank you for the comment, and we'll consider the revisions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought I saw Dr. Jenkins' hand raised. I don't know if that was just an accident or if you did have a question.
No, I did not. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So are there any other questions as it relates to the clarity and the scope of 8A before we move on? All right, next slide, please. Please take a moment, everyone, to read the introduction and question 8BI to yourself before I open it up to the committee. Please read that on your own. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 8BI? Okay, I don't see any questions. We'll move on to 8BII. Please take a moment to read that on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 8BII? All right, we'll move on to 8BIII. Please take a moment to read 8BIII on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Okay, I don't see anyone's hand raised. We will now go on to the next charge question. All right, please take a moment to read this charge question on your own, 8C. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Bronco? I'm sorry, Dr. Dorson.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we had some public comments on this as well, referring to some previously submitted to EPA data, and whether EPA considered it or worked that in somehow. So if that could be addressed, or maybe got the illusion wrong, that would be great.
Okay, so I just want to say that the program office, they will review the public comments in full. Our goal for today's meeting is to focus on the scope and clarity of the charge questions, and to ask members of the SACC to weigh in on the questions during the meeting. So they will go ahead and take the public comments into consideration. Thank you. But if you have anything about the clarity of this charge question or scope, please ask it now.
Thank you. I'll try to circumvent some of my questions.
Okay, thank you. All right. So does anyone have any remaining questions as it relates to the scope and clarity of the 8C? Okay, let's move on to the next one. All right, please take a moment to read the introduction of the charge on your own. Next slide, please. Please take a moment to read question 9A on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 9A? Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hand. We will move on to 9B. Please take a moment to read 9B on your own. All right, Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so this is sort of for both 9B and 9C, but so we're looking at 5 individual assessments here. And there are, it appears to be some different conclusions about the mode of action and linearity and nonlinearity and the likelihood of human carcinogenicity. Just for us, for our general understanding, across these documents, have the same staff been evaluating the mode of action and coming, and the same people are making these determinations just as we review them to get a sense of, are these sort of individually produced documents, or are they internally consistent, same staff, et cetera, as we evaluate these different conclusions across some of the 5 chemistries?
Yes, hi. This is Kathy Denisio, Senior Science Advisor from EPA. Can you clarify? So your question is whether they are the same teams across the different chemicals? That's your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we have, the way that we sort of operate in our office, we do have different teams working on the risk evaluations for each chemical, but we also have crossover. So I know that's one of those, a non-answer to your question, but it's not a clean line. There are folks that are assigned to each chemical, but then we have some crossover, in particular when there are, really nuanced, specific technical expertise needed, and we focus in on the individual in the office that has that expertise, regardless of which chemical we're working on. We also have science advisors like myself and some of the others on the call who work across all of the chemicals and try to ensure consistency. So it's a little bit of both. We have different teams, but then we also have pieces and staff in place to try to ensure consistency across.
Okay, thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Denosio. Are there any remaining questions as it relates to clarity and scope before we move on to 9C? All right, Dr. Dorson?
Yeah, just picking up on Dr. Thompson's commentary here. I would have expected to see more discussion about mode of action and mode of action alternatives prior to dose response assessment, which of course, as EPA knows well, is part of their 2005 guidelines. And also a distinction between genotoxicity, which is an endpoint many times it has a threshold, and mutagenicity, which does not necessarily have a threshold, because the two of those are described in EPA's 2007 guidelines on mutagenicity and genotoxicity. And it really does make a difference between these chemicals. So work maybe a few of those words into the charge question perhaps would be helpful, at least to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dorson, for the comment. Okay, are there any other further questions about 9B before we move on to 9C? All right, please take a moment to read 9C on your own. All right, so for 9C, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, I'm not seeing any hands. We'll move on to the next question. Next slide. All right, so we ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction of the charge on your own. Okay, next slide, please. All right, please take a moment to read the introduction and also the charge questions on your own, particularly 10AI. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 10AI? All right, we'll move on to the next one. Does anybody have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope on 10AII? All right, so then we'll move on to the last one. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 10A III? All right, next slide, please. All right, charge question 11. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to this charge on your own. Next slide. Please read 11A on your own. All right. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 11A? Dr. Haber?
So this is not a clarifying question, but I admit I have not read every single one of these questions prior to this meeting, and there's a lot of technical stuff to parse. And so I was wondering, I know you want to get through this meeting, and we all want to get through it, but if you could slow down just a little bit to give us time to make sure that we think that everything is clear as intended, that would be really useful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I will do that. Thank you. All right, Dr. Shin?
Yes. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yes. So from the question number 11, I think that the line number 5, that should be the appendix A8 instead of appendix B8. I just want to correct that information. And then if you go back to the next slide, here EPA implemented the probabilistic approach for the DVL model parameter of skin surface area using a uniform distribution with 0 centimeter square as the low bound. But based on the table, it is, I think that 535 centimeter square as the low bound. I found that information in another table. So I think that we need to get clarification regarding that information. And I have one more question. So do we have to assume that the workers are only exposed to these chemicals to their hands only? So meaning that they are wearing the long sleeves during their work, and then so only both hands are being exposed to this chemical? Do they not wear gloves?
Is there anyone from the program office who can answer Dr. Shin's question?
Andrew Middleton, EPA. I would say we consider use of PPE throughout our various portions of our risk assessment. I think for your comment, or for the purpose of your review, I think commenting on the reasonableness of various types of PPE and the sort of information and data that you have related to the use would be helpful. So
Yeah.
should the assumption be, but we do assume the assumption is that the total surface skin area is equal to the amount of 2 hands, but there could be exposures to other parts of the body as well, such as the forearm.
Yeah. Hi, this is Kathy Denisio, Senior Science Advisor, EPA. I just want to make a little bit of a clarification to Andrew's response. Thanks, Andrew. Though the 1070 centimeters squared is the surface area of 2 hands, the way that it is interpreted in, or the way that it is implemented in our risk evaluations is that that is an approximation of the total surface area that might be exposed of skin in total. So it may be that it's more of, 80% of your hands, but then some additional part of the forearm or some other parts of the skin on your body. So we're using those numbers from the hands as an approximation of total surface area exposed, understanding that they're, we don't know exactly in every single case which parts of the skin are exposed. That is sort of the first iteration in the risk evaluation of the assumptions of dermal exposure. And then the assumptions of PPE use typically come after that in the risk evaluation. So hopefully you'll see in the risk evaluation the estimates of exposure based on no PPE, and then the estimates, the risk estimates with a factor of PPE applied. I think the way that we apply PPE is different in each risk evaluation, depending on the data that we have available, right? And the way that we incorporate PPE in the final risk determination is different depending on what data we have available. So that's sort of, I'm giving a little bit of a general response, given that we have a number of new SACC members. I think getting back to the scope of this question, what we're focused on is, the way that the probabilistic implementation of the model is implemented, and particularly using the bounds of 0 and the 1070 centimeters squared, but with the assumption that we are evaluating a total surface area exposed, not just the hands. Are there any more clarifying questions based on my explanation? Hopefully I didn't confuse it more.
Dr. Shin, did the program office answer your question?
Not really, but isn't it unreasonable? Isn't it not realistic to assume that any person has a 0 centimeter like a skin surface area? We have as a low bound.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, because I think that it is not realistic to use 0 centimeter square as a low bound for the uniform distribution, because any person has a hand.
Okay, I want to interject and just say again, it seems like these types of questions are good for the SACC peer review meeting. We are focused on the scope and the clarity of the charge questions. We want to make sure that the questions are asked in a way where you, as a member of the committee, can answer and provide a response. So, so if this is best saved for the SACC meeting, let's do that at that time. I will now turn it over to Kathy Donosio to provide any final remarks. But again, this is just for the scope and clarity of the charge questions.
Got it.
Thank you, Allie. That's what I was going to say as well, is I think that's what we're looking for as the response to the question would be what your thoughts are on the bounds that we've chosen and the shape of the distribution. So we would ask that you please include that in the report and discussion during the SACC meeting itself.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I believe I thought I saw Dr. Tansel's hand up.
Oops. Yes, I guess my question was answered. For some of these occupational studies include some habits, like people touching their faces or, other activities during the work. I'm assuming that is outside the scope.
I'm sorry. Hi, this is Kathy Donosio, EPA. I guess I'm unclear. So, I mean, the scope of the question is about the surface area being assumed to be exposed that we use in our exposure modeling. So anything related to surface area exposed would be in scope of the question, and when you discuss in the meeting and provide your response. Is that the question you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Denocio. Thank you, Dr. Tansel. Are there any other remaining questions as it relates to the scope and clarity of 11A before we move on? All right, next slide, please. All right, please take a moment to read the introduction and to the charge and also this charge question on your own. I will now ask the committee, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Garvey?
Hi, I did have one question about the reference in the study being from 1992. Just when I go back into the document, having looked into this a little bit, the section refers to a 2013 memo that I think may also be a wrong year from a CEB memorandum. So I just wanted to have the EPA kind of check that question to make sure that reference is consistent with the reference that's provided in the draft assessment.
All right, is there anybody from the agency that can answer Mr. Garvey's question? I believe he may have, I believe there might be some sort of a possible error to the question.
I think we will we'll check that reference with the team and provide any updates with the following charge questions. Yeah.
All right, are there any other clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 11A? If not, we'll move on to the next question. Next slide, please. Yes. All right, so please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. And I will ask now Dr. Middleton to please read the bold text for 11C.
Andrew Middleton, EPA. Please comment on whether EPA considered and applied variability in fraction absorbed values appropriately. Please provide alternative approaches that the agency could consider for fraction absorbed value selection based on weight fraction of the chemical.
Thank you, Dr. Middleton. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, if not, next slide, please. We are now moving on to trans-1,2-dichloroethylene. Next slide, please. For this chemical, Dr. Ali Shoati will read the charge questions. For charge question 12, please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. And I see that Mr. Wright has his hand raised. Is that for this charge question or for the prior one?
That is for this one.
Okay, all right, I'll just wait.
I jumped the gun a little.
It's okay, it's good to be prepared. Yes, you're enthused. All right, Dr. Shoati, please read the bold font.
Sure, can I get a sound check? Ali first, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you.
Okay, thank you. Please comment on the strengths, limitations, and uncertainties in EPA's proposed POD for acute inhalation risk assessment for trans-1,2-dichloroethylene derived from the HERT 1993 study. Please include in your response a consideration of the strengths, limitations, and uncertainties associated with the use of the rat as the animal model for eye irritation for human exposures, including pharmacodynamic differences between species, considering your comments, please suggest alternative approaches for the acute inhalation POD. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shoti. And just as a reminder, the red font that you see here is a revision to charge question 12. I see that Mr. Wright has a question.
Yes, 1,2-DCE, excuse me, exists as two isomers. Why did EPA focus on only the trans isomer and not consider the cis isomer? And if you have answered that in the background document, I apologize. I still have some reading to do. And I've got a follow-up too.
Sure. Just give me one moment just to confer with our
Ollie,
staff.
I can answer that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Dr. Eisenreich can kind of I'm in on
Hi,
the
Karen Eisenreich, EPA. There's not an easy answer to this other than that the way these chemicals were prioritized, it was prioritized specifically as trans. So that's the chemical we were told to assess and address.
Okay.
Trans was on the work plan, our work plan chemical list that we draw. The statute requires us to draw from for prioritization, and so it's a bit of a relic of that. That's how the process kind of worked. Cis was not included, so it's always been just trans through the 2014 work plan to now the risk evaluations under Lautenberg. I know it's not a great a great response, but that is where we're at. It's just fact.
I understand. And of the two isomers, my understanding is that trans is the one most often used when it is, excuse me, when it has when a single isomer is used. But often workers especially are exposed to the two isomers in a mixture. How does EPA propose to assess the risk, or how have you assessed the risk to the combined exposure of both?
Okay, so I just want to say, is this a clarifying question and question about the scope of this charge question, or can this be saved for the SACC meeting in August?
I think it's a scope question because
Okay.
it's an evaluation that I think is missing from the charge questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wright.
Sure. So Ali Shah, the EPA. So with regarding to our assessment, this particular risk evaluation was based on trans. So the data that we did evaluate for this chemical was bound to the CAS number for trans itself. We did come across data, for example, for the mixture, as well as for the cis isomer in our, as part of our systematic review process. We did look at data that may have been captured in that sense, and we do evaluate that data, but we do kind of look at the uncertainties associated with trying to derive a direct chemical association to the health effect associated with trans explicitly, whereas data that may be of a mixture, we do consider that as not specific for this assessment, but it is included within our weight of evidence and other considerations in our uncertainties and the data as we're evaluating. I hope that provides clarity.
I'm not sure I completely understand that. You said that it's not considered in this evaluation, but in some other manner.
So the assessment is specific for trans 1,2-dichloroethylene. During our systematic review process and our evaluation of the data and the various sources that we identify, information may be coming from mixture or cis isomer information. We do consider that in terms of our application of it in weight of evidence, in terms of trying to find some association, but often we may be using only that data for example, applications of read across, or in terms of, the causality is a little bit less specific when we're dealing with a mixture. So we are trying to bound our data set to trans-specific information.
So if a worker is exposed to both in a mixture, he or she would be evaluated for that exposure as if it was only the trans fraction of the mixture, and the cis fraction would be ignored?
So with regard to mixtures, that data would not explicitly consider it only as a trans as like a surrogate for the mixture. Rather, it would be characterized as an uncertainty in that particular exposure scenario. So we wouldn't explicitly say it's a trans exposure for, even though it's mixture information. So I'm not sure if that requires a little bit more discussion amongst the team to kind of provide you a more concise answer.
Yeah, okay. And I think we're out. I think we're
it's a little
outside of the
nuanced.
scope question at this point.
Right,
So
right.
we will save that for the discussion in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Yes, I see Dr. Jacobs online. I don't know if he had any further comments or any additional input.
I don't want to keep this going too long. This is Keith Jacobs, EPA. But just to hopefully put a bow on the discussion, we consider exposure data and hazard data as relevant as it is available. But what my colleague was trying to say is the analysis must be for trans, but we consider data on cis or the mixture as it is relevant to the evaluation of trans, because we must make a risk determination on trans. But this hazard question is for the risk evaluation that we're evaluating, which includes trans. So as what some of your comments, for example, you may say, there is acute data on cis and we should consider it, and you don't think we sufficiently considered it. So we believe that the question as written captures your concerns.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jacobs, and thank you, Mr. Wright. Are there any further or remaining questions as it relates to the scope and clarity to 12? All right, we will move on to the next charge question. Next slide, please. All right, please take a moment to read this slide to yourself. Next slide. All right, please also take a moment to read this question 13AI to yourself. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of charge question 13A? Dr. Dorson?
Yeah, again, we had some angst about this particular thing, and I presume our EPA colleagues are going to work some of those comments into the charge question. So I'm fine as it will be amended. Thanks.
Is there anyone else from the committee that has any questions as it relates to the clarity and scope of question 13A? All right, not seeing any hands. So please take a moment to read 13AI to yourself very quickly. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions as it relates to the scope of 13AI? Dr. Gentry?
Yes, I just wanted to raise this issue again in case it comes up about the quality of the study, and to make sure, because it looks like we're not getting the systematic review documents for this compound either, and that's where we would see how EPA applied the criteria and how they came up with high quality. So if that issue comes up, because we've had questions in the past about the study quality and how EPA came to that conclusion.
This is Ali Shaw at the EPA. As part of the submission to the the SACC docket. We did provide the systematic review evaluation forms as part of the package. So they should be available in the same space that the actual technical support document is, along with it's the human health and environmental system data evaluation as well as extraction files. So that should be available in the same location.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shoti. And Dr. Gentry, I will email you and everybody on the committee the risk evaluation dockets, because that's where you'll find a lot of the systematic review documents as well. So I'll provide that and put that on our SharePoint site that that the peer review team is using.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any further questions from anyone on the committee about clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 13AI? Next slide, please. All right, so for 13AI, if Dr. Shoity could please read what's in the bold.
Sure. Ali Shawati, EPA. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of deriving a POD from Barnes et al. 1985.
Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, not seeing any hands. All right, we will go ahead and move on to the next charge question. If you could please take a moment to read the introduction of 13AI to yourself. All right, Dr. Shoity, can you please read what's in bold for 13AI?
Thank you. Ali Shawati, EPA. Considering your comments on charge questions 13AI through II, please comment on the extent to which this World Health Organization JMPR guidance on when not to derive PODs may be relevant and appropriate for repeated exposure to trans-1,2-dichloroethylene.
Thank you, Dr. Shoity. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. All right, please take a moment to read charge question 13B to yourself before I open it up to the committee for any questions. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question, charge question 13B? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question. Please take a moment to read charge question 13C on your own before I open it up to the committee for any questions. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Chen?
Not to be too repetitive, but I just want to make sure that this is really just about human health because it is in this draft for human health and environmental hazard assessment. So just checking.
Thank you for the comment. Ali Shawati, EPA. Yes, this charge question is specific for the human exposure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you, Dr. Shoity. Does anyone else from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope? All right, next slide, please. We ask that everyone take a moment to read charge question 14 on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of number 14? Okay, next slide, please. All right, thank you, Dr. Shoeti. We have now moved on to our last chemical, ethylene dibromide. And we're now getting started the charge question for ethylene dibromide, in which Dr. Sarah O will read the charge questions. So for charge question 15, we ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction on your own. Next slide, please. We also ask that everyone take a moment to read this introduction on your own, and I will later ask Dr. O to read what's in the bold text. So please take a moment to read this intro on your own. And please note that the red font means that this is a red line edit. It's changed. All right, Dr. O, please read the charge question 15A in the bold font.
Good afternoon. This is Sarah O at EPA. Please comment on the relevance of this data set as the basis for risk estimates for the 3 OESs identified. Include in your response recommendations for additional data sources or lines of evidence that may be considered to inform exposure estimates for these OESs.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. 15B. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. Okay, Dr. O, can you please read what's in the bold font for question 15B?
Sure, this is Sarah O at EPA. Considering your response to charge question 15A, please comment on when to diverge from the sequential data hierarchy, e.g. when to consider data from multiple levels of the hierarchy concurrently, or when to defer to data that is lower in the hierarchy, but is determined to be of higher quality, more relevant, or more applicable, and how multiple lines of evidence should be brought in to inform a risk conclusion when necessary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. O. Mr. Wright, I believe you have a question as it relates to the scope and clarity of 15B. Mr. Wright?
Sorry,
Oh,
I
it's
had
okay.
everything turned off. I apologize.
No problem. It's okay.
This is more a comment than a question, but it seems like the first part of 15B, the part that was the intro, it isn't exactly the same as the actual charge question. Like the one is really based on how you evaluate monitoring data, and the other is based on how you look at the whole sequence of data from different sources. And just to comment, it seems like those two don't really fit together, or maybe I better say that maybe the actual question is more, I guess, broader than the introduction.
Would the program office like to take a moment to confer with the team before providing a response?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, this is Kathy Denisio, EPA. I see your point there, Dr. Wright. So why don't we take a look at that and see if there's something that we need to clarify or tweak in the wording. to make it clear what we're trying to get. I think we're probably trying to get at both things, but we'll take a look at that and consider that.
Okay, thank you. I
Thanks.
just hope nothing gets lost from the combination, because really all those questions are important.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you, Mr. D'Annunzio. I'm sorry, Dr. D'Annunzio. All right, it's going to be late in the afternoon. Sorry about that. All right, so Dr. Tansel,
Yeah,
you have a question?
Yes, my question is about 15A. I didn't act fast enough.
Oh, okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
Let's go back. Let's go back to this prior slide. All right.
Yeah, here there are 3 OESs identified. Are we supposed to look at these independently, or maybe it's possible that exposure of 2 and 3, it's possible happening in combination? I just wanted to get some clarification on that.
Yeah, can you clarify the latter part of your question about?
The question is, here there are 3 possible sources or exposure origins.
Correct.
It's possible that someone could be exposed to 2 of them, or maybe all of them. Are we just looking at these independently as 3 different routes, or are we also looking at any combination of these 3 routes?
Okay, so, and sorry, I didn't introduce myself, Kathy D'Annunzio, EPA, for the transcript. Yeah, so I think, in our evaluations, we look at exposures by what we call the OES, the occupational exposure scenario. And then within that OES, we look at the activities that are defined under the OES. So for example, import and repackaging, the activities that would be done by a worker under the general umbrella of import and repackaging activities. And then within that, we look at whether the individual is exposed dermally, via inhalation, via oral exposure, et cetera. That is done independently for each OES, depending on what actual activities the worker is engaged in. I think in this question, what we're really focused on is the use of the monitoring data for those OES, and the 3 OES are given as 3 different examples of where a similar type of monitoring data was used for each OES individually. So you can comment both generally on the use of this baseline monitoring data set for all 3 OES, but also on the use of each subset of monitoring data for each of the individual OES, if you so choose to.
All right, thank you, Dr. D'Annunzio. Do you have any follow-up questions to that, Dr. Tansel?
No, all clear. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll go back to 15B. Next slide, please. All right, and so before we move on, I'm wondering if anybody from the committee has any clarifying questions about the scope of this question, or clarifying question on 15B before we move on. All right, next slide, please. Okay, everybody, take a moment to read charge question 16 on your own. All right, next slide, please. All right, please take a moment to read 16A on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Lee?
Okay, so this is Lee, SACC member. So I was just wondering, so actually my question is about for 16A and 16B combined. So I noticed that the EPA used a combination of AP42 and the CEM model together to simulate occupational exposure. But before I can go ahead and comment on this approach, I was wondering why the EPA didn't consider using the occupational exposure modeling. For example, EPA has the chemical screening tool for exposures and environmental releases, a chemical steer. So I was wondering why this was not used for this sort of modeling. Thank you.
Yes, hi, Kathy Denicio, EPA. I think we'd welcome your comments on that topic and the use of potential alternative models in the report and during the SACC meeting itself. But for this question, we're focused on evaluation of the analysis that's currently presented in the document. And the analysis presented in the document is the AP42 along with the CEM. So that's what we're asking for comment on.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lee. Are there any other further questions about, as it relates to the clarity and scope on 16A? All right, we'll move to 16B. Please take a moment to read that to yourself. All right, so does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. All right, next slide, please. We ask that everyone take a moment and read the 17AI on your own. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 17AI? All right, so we'll move on to 17AII. Please take a moment to read that charge question to yourself. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Dr. Chen?
I just wanted to make sure that this was just for human exposure because it comes later on as relating inhalation to dermal roots. Is this just for human exposures in this question?
So this is Sarah O from EPA. Yes. So I guess to your earlier questions in this one as well, all the hazard analysis is in the same technical support document, including human health and environmental. So, but this charge question does particularly pertain to the POD selection for human health hazard ID.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Dr. O. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Does anyone else from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 17AI? All right, we will now move on to the next question, 17AII. Please take a moment to read question 17AII to yourself. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll move on to 17AII. Please take a moment to read 17AII on your own. Okay, so does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about 17A III? Dr. Ryer Powder?
Yeah. So is this just related to inhalation exposure for the POD?
Hello, this is Sarah O. Yes, for this charge question, this one is specifically asking about POD selection and potential alternatives regarding the acute intermediate inhalation POD.
Just inhalation. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ryer Powder, and thank you, Dr. O. Is there anyone else from the committee that has any clarifying questions or questions about the scope for 17A III? All right, we will move on to the next slide. All right, 17B, please take a moment to read the introduction and the charge question in the font on your own. All right, so does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question?
Yes, hi, Kathy Denisio, EPA. Ali, is it possible to go back to 17A before we ask for comments on 17B? I think we have an additional clarification.
Okay, sure, yes.
So I think, per the question that we received from the SACC member just now, 17AII does ask about the route-to-route extrapolation from inhalation to dermal. So I just wanted to clarify that point since the SACC member, I'm sorry, I didn't catch whose name that was.
Dr. Chen.
Dr. Chen asked about whether this was for inhalation only.
Oh wait, Dr. Ryer Powder. I'm sorry, Dr. Ryer Powder.
Ryer Powder.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. So I just want to clarify that part II does ask about the route-to-route extrapolation from inhalation to dermal. Are there any other additional questions?
Dr. Ryer Powder, does that answer your question more in full?
No, actually now I'm a little confused. So the question in 3, please comment on the strength and uncertainties of this study as a potential alternative for POD selection for the acute and or intermediate duration. That's using that Nitschke study for inhalation as opposed to a route-to-route extrapolation, right?
Oh, she's reading 17A III. Is that what you're talking about, Dr. Denosio? Or are you talking?
My question was on III.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was talking about II. I just want to make it clear, right, that the entire 17A was not solely about inhalation. So you're asking about 17III specifically.
Correct. And whether we're supposed to be looking at that Nitschke study as an alternative for a POD for inhalation as opposed to using a route-to-route exposure.
I understand. I'm going to defer to the team to answer your question. Apologies if I've confused it more. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, sorry about that. Confusion, Dr. Ryer Powder. So the Nitschke study was identified as a potential alternative for characterizing the inhalation acute intermediate POD. This question 17A III specifically looks at this study as it pertains to the inhalation POD. But to Kathy's point, for 17A II, the short study was specifically identified for various reasons for the POD that is characterized in the hazard TSD for both inhalation, acute, intermediate, but also for route-to-route extrapolation. But 17A specifically looks at niche D for the inhalation POD. Does that clarify?
Yeah, I think maybe that should be amended to please comment on the strength and uncertainties of the studies as a potential alternative for POD selection for the acute and or intermediate duration for respiratory effects or for dermal effects or for whichever one you're asking for.
No, we really appreciate your feedback. We will take that into consideration as we finalize the SACC charge question. So we can probably work that in and clarify this charge question.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. O. And thank you, Dr. Ryer-Powder, and also Dr. D'Annunzio. I guess before we move on, are there any other clarifying questions or questions about the scope for any of these three questions before we move back to the next slide? Okay, let's go to 17B. All right, so I guess I'll just ask if anybody has anyone from the committee has any clarifying questions or questions about the scope for 17B. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, 17C, please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own, and please read 17CI on your own. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 17CI? All right, if not, we'll move on to the next question, 17CII. Please take a moment to read 17CII on your own. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 17CII? All right, next slide. All right, so please take a moment to read the introduction of the charge on your own. And I'll ask Dr. O to please read 17DI.
Sarah O, EPA. 17DI. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties based on centribular, centribular liver necrosis reported by NTP 1982 in rats for assessing non-cancer risk from chronic inhalation exposures to ethylene dibromide. Please include in your comments a consideration of the study quality for the NTP 1982 study.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll move on to 17DII. Please take a moment to read this charge question to yourself, and then I will ask Dr. O to read the bold font. All right, Dr. O, can you please read what's in the bold font for 17DII?
Sure. Sarah O, EPA. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of these epidemiology studies. Schrader et al. in 1988, Radcliffe et al. in 1987, and Schrader et al. in 1987 as a potential alternative for deriving a POD.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Okay, well, we'll just move on to 17D III. Please read the introductory text for 17D III on your own before I ask Dr. O to read the bold fonted question. Okay, Dr. O, would you please read 17D III, the bold font?
Sure, and Sarah O, 17D III. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties in the selected inhalation chronic non-cancer POD for the use of estimating a dermal chronic non-cancer POD using the default and PBBK approaches, including the appropriateness for this route, dermal, and duration chronic.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, not seeing any hands raised, we will move on to the next slide. All right, 17E. Please take a moment to read the introduction of the charge on your own and reading 17E EI on your own. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next, we'll go on to the next charge question, 17E II. Please take a moment to read 17E II on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own for 17F. All right, next slide, please. Please continue to read the introduction to charge question F on your own, please. And please also read 17FI on your own as well. Okay, so does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. All right, we are now at charge question 18. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction on the charge on your own. Next slide, please. Please read question 18A on your own, please. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Okay, the next question is charge question 18B. Please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own before I ask Dr. O to read the bold font in 18B. All right, Dr. O, could you please read the bold font for 18B?
Sure, this is Sarah O, EPA. 18B, please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of EPA's preliminary cancer classification for ethylene dibromide.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 18B? All right, we'll go on to the next slide. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own, and also what's in the bold font on your own as well for 18C. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 18C? Dr. Durson?
Yes, thank you very much. Good question overall, but I'm a little confused with the introduction. It's the fourth line down, with a molecular initiating event, MIE, of DNA alkylation. Well, as I understand it, based on EPA guidelines, it's mutation. A molecular initiating event should be mutation if we're talking about a linear dose response curve. That's the first level of mutagenic mode of action. So that might be a typographical error there, or maybe somehow a misdirected phrase. So I'm just asking for clarification from my EPA colleagues.
Yes, they're probably conferring amongst themselves before they present a collated response.
Sure. Oh, yeah, of course.
Mhm.
Hello, this is Sarah at EPA. I think the terminology that we used for this charge question is what's used in the AOP 15 that we cited here, and that there may be a slight difference in terminology used between mode of action and adverse outcome pathway. But to your point, Dr. Dorson, we can take a step back and look back at the resources and make clarifications as needed before we finalize the charge question.
Right, and perhaps reference to EPA's guidelines 2007 on genotoxicity and mutagenicity and the differences between the two, where one is associated with a linear dose response curve, and one is not. That might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorson. Wondering if anybody else from the committee has any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 18C before we move on. All right, next slide, please. Please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own, and then I will ask Dr. O to please read 18DI. All right, Dr. Oak, would you please read 18DI?
This is Sarah O, EPA. 18DI, please comment on EPA's calculation of the oral slope factor, uncertainties in the dose response assessment, and any additional information to be considered.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next charge question, 18DII. Please read this charge question on your own before I open up to the committee for any questions. All right, does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question for 18DII?
Yeah.
All right, yes, Dr. Dorson.
Yeah, I have one. So this is new to me. As I understand EPA guidelines, 1980 ambient water quality criteria, there's an adjustment factor used on the slope when mortality is eroding part of the lifespan of the animal due to tumors or for other reasons. And that adjustment is part of EPA guidelines. This idea of 100% early mortality is something that you need to check, our colleagues to check. I can send the EPA, methods if that's needed. All right, so anyhow, it's just clarification of EPA methods used for this particular adjustment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Dorson. Is there anyone else from the committee that has any clarifying questions about the scope of this question or clarifying questions for this question?
This is Sarah at EPA. Thank you for your comment, Dr. Dorson. Are you asking or you're referring to the poly K adjustment?
No, am I still live? Yeah, I think I am.
Yeah.
No, the
Can hear you.
100%, the high dose group was set to 100% in order to evaluate effects of early mortality. There's an EPA guidelines that adjusts the slope factor due to early mortality. So in other words, if you lose lifespan, there's an adjustment of the lifespan over the reduced rate of lifespan. And it's part of the EPA 1980 ambient water quality criteria guidelines. I can send you the set of guidelines. Maybe this is new guidelines. I have just never seen it before. That's all.
I will confer with the team on the guideline studies the guideline that you're referring to.
Sure, I'll send it through.
Yeah, please send it to me, and then I will, and
Mhm.
then I will go ahead and send it to the program office.
No worries.
All right.
We'll be done.
Thank you. And we can
Mhm.
consider that when finalizing the charge question,
Sure.
Dr. Dorson. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other clarifying questions or questions about the scope of 18 DII? All right, we will move on to 18 DII. Please read that on your own, including the bolded charge question on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 18 DII? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. We are now at 18E. Please take a moment to read the introduction and the charge question in the bolded font at the end of that introductory text on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? Okay, we will move on to 18EI. Please take a moment to read 18EI on your own before I open it up to the committee for any questions. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 18EI? All right, next slide, please. Charge question 19. Please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge question on your own. Also, please read the introduction to the text on 19A as well. All right, Dr. O, can you please read the bold font in 19A?
Sure. This is Sarah O at EPA. Please comment on the strengths and uncertainties of the PBPK model structure, parameterization, underlying biological assumptions, routes of exposure, descriptions, appropriateness of selection of dose metrics, and EPA's approach to evaluating model uncertainty and confidence, as presented in section 6.2 of the draft hazard assessment for ethylene dibromide and the draft ethylene dibromide PBPK modeling reporting document.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 19A? All right, not seeing any hands. Next slide, please. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction on the charge on your own. And also please read 19BI, the bold font, on your own as well. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question for 19BI? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question, 19BII. And please take a moment to read 19BII on your own before I open it up to the committee for questions. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 19BII? Okay, next slide. 19C. Please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. And please also take a moment to read the bold fonted question in 19CI on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 19CI? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question, 19CII. Please take a moment to read 19CI on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of 19CII? Okay, next slide, please. Question 20. Please take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. Next slide, please. Please continue to read this charge question on your own. Next slide, please. Please take a moment to read question 20A on your own, including the bold font. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question for 20A? Dr. Ottinger?
I just have a general question, and this is the first time I've seen a reference to an age span, and wondered if lifetime exposures and chronic exposures are woven into the other charge questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ottinger. Does anyone from the program office have a response? you may take a moment to confer amongst yourselves before coming online. Is anyone from the program office ready to answer Dr. Ottinger's question, or would you like more time?
One moment, they're working.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stump things.
Hey, hello, this is Sarah O at EPA. I think we might need a minute, but just to clarify, Dr. Ottinger, is your question specifically pertaining to this charge question for ethylene dibromides analysis, or is this in general?
It was actually more general, which is probably really unfair. It's just that in the past reviews, we've commented at times about just the importance of looking over different life stages. That's all.
I see. So I will confer with the team and we can see whether or not we need to consider any clarification to this charge question.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And it's already in this charge question. So I was just asking a more general question, but honestly, I didn't mean to stop action. So sorry about that.
So Dr. O, would you like more time to talk to the team about it right now, or would you like to get back with Dr. Ottinger and the committee later?
Well, I guess just to kind of close the loop for ethylene dibromides analysis specifically, this one specifically looks at the analysis that is presented in Appendix D of the draft chemistry fate release and exposure assessment technical support document. And although this question specifically doesn't tease out age span, we do model exposure for the average human adult. And so Allie, I guess in terms of your question, I'll talk to the team and we can check back in to see if we need to clarify at all for this charge question and possibly others as
And
needed.
it may be more appropriate to leave that for the discussion during the panel meeting as well, rather than spending time on it now.
All right,
Again,
thank you.
apologies if I stopped things.
I don't think you did. I mean, this is about the scope and clarity, so that's the opportunity to do so at this meeting. Dr. Dorson?
Well, just as a continuation, the previous assessments are based on lifetime exposures. This one is different. It's, we don't have the early lifetime exposures here. When we're not sure, we do lifetime adjustments as previously indicated. So that's the difference between here. This exposure is specific to only the adults. It has nothing to do with little people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dorson. Are there any other clarifying questions or questions about the scope for 20A? All right, we'll move on to 20B. Please take a moment to read charge question 20B on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, we'll move on to the next charge question. Charge question 20C. Please take a moment to read charge question 20C on your own. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or any questions about the scope of this question? All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're on the last charge question 21. We ask that everyone take a moment to read the introduction to the charge on your own. Next slide, please. All right, I will ask Dr. O to please read the bold font in question number 21 now.
EPA for question 21. Given the paucity of avian hazard studies on ethylene dibromide, please comment on the appropriateness, including strengths and uncertainties of the use of the STIR model to derive an acute inhalation hazard value for the purposes of risk characterization for avian taxa. Include in your response comments on the strengths and uncertainties of the empirical data used to derive the LD50 for Japanese quail and the strength of the data to support a quantitative risk assessment.
Thank you, Dr. O. Does anyone from the committee have any clarifying questions or questions about the scope of charge question 21? Dr. Ottinger?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions, but first of all, I want to say thank you very much for including this charge question. I really appreciate it. And I just want to clarify, the oral studies are being used to estimate the acute inhalation using the STIR model, correct? For the LD50 for Japanese quail?
Sarah OEP, are you asking whether or not we used empirical oral studies as input parameters for
correct
the STIR method? Yes. So we use avian and rat,
right?
Yeah, oral and then inhalation rat data as assumptions.
Because that's what was available. Yeah. And I confess I've downloaded the literature, but I haven't read through the studies thoroughly yet. And so the other question is, does the model take into account the differences in the respiratory system, such as the air sacs and metabolic differences and, all that between birds and mammals?
So I think that's as great of a question as this is. Oh, sorry, this is Sarah at EPA. Sarah O at EPA. I think that question's probably better answered during the SACC meeting.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, that's fair. No problem. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Dr. Chen?
Yeah, I had similar questions, but I guess I wanted to understand. I think this is the only ecology charge question. And I wanted to understand how this inhalation as the exposure pathway for terrestrial organisms. I actually didn't think that was true, but I guess I comment on that later, or how did you come to that? It certainly isn't necessarily true for avian organisms. So yeah, just wondering about that.
This is Sarah O EPA. No, thank you for your question. In the hazard technical support document for ethylene dibromide, we explain why we've basically scoped in this pathway, this exposure route for terrestrial taxa, specifically for birds. And so I think the answer to your question is probably better answered during the SACC as well. Unless there's something about the charge question that is confusing.
No, it's not confusing. I guess, yeah, I think you're right. Okay, thanks very much.
No worries.
All right, thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you, Dr. O. Is there anyone else from the committee that has any clarifying questions or questions about the scope for number 21? All right, I think we are now at the end of the charge question presentation. So I guess I will, okay, we have a question by Dr. Irwin from the EPA.
Yes, thank you everyone for participating. I just want to loop back on charge question 7. Yes, it is a typo. It should be the Will Study 2004. That's all.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Irwin. Okay, so I believe you all will make those changes and get a revised version to the committee as soon as possible. Thank you. Are there any other questions before we close and adjourn today's meeting? All right. Well, I want to thank Dr. Dorson, did you have anything to say? Okay, all right. You had your video on, so I thought maybe you had something to add. Well, I just want to thank the commenters and the peer reviewers and to everyone listening in today. If there are no further questions or comments, we can adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much for attending today's virtual public meeting. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye now.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.